Ever heard someone try to argue that the Earth is flat using, of all things, emergency landings?
Yeah, you know those moments where a flight has to make an unplanned landing somewhere totally unexpected?
Right, right.
Well, get ready for a wild ride today because we're diving deep into a book that uses these exact situations to challenge, wait for it, the globe model.
It's definitely a curious corner of flat Earth theory.
And speaking of curious, the author of this book isn't just some random person with a blog.
Okay,
They actually worked for an airline.
interesting. So they knew a thing or two about flight routes.
Exactly. But their journey down this, let's call it a unique rabbit hole, began with a soccer tournament way back in 1988, the Australia Bicentennial Gold Cup.
A soccer tournament. How did that lead to questioning the shape of the Earth?
Well, the author happened to be a huge soccer fan,
Okay,
and they were following the Brazilian national team's journey to the tournament.
makes sense.
Now, picture this. You're flying from, let's say, Rio de Janeiro in South America all the way to Sydney, Australia.
Okay, long flight.
Logically, you'd think they'd head sort of westward across the Pacific, right?
Wow.
Maybe make a stop somewhere in South America or...
Yeah, like Santiago, Chile, maybe, and then down to Sydney. That seems like the most direct route.
Exactly. But instead of taking what seems like the most straightforward path, the team's flight plan had them going from Rio to, get this, Los Angeles?
Los Angeles.
Yeah. And then from LA all the way to Sydney.
Wow. That does seem like an incredibly roundabout way to get to Australia.
Right. Like if you look at a globe, it just seems unnecessarily long. And that's what really stuck with the author.
So that's what sparked their initial doubts about flights operating on a globe.
Exactly. That one flight really got them thinking. And years later, they started to notice what they felt was a pattern. But it wasn't just any flights, it was these emergency landings.
Ah, so these unplanned diversions really caught their attention.
Precisely. And they saw it as more evidence against the globe model.
Interesting. So walk me through one of these emergency landing cases that stood out to them.
Okay, so one example they analyzed in the book is China Airlines Flight 008 back in 1988.
Right.
It was traveling from Taipei to Los Angeles.
Okay.
But mid-flight, they had some kind of problem. I don't remember if it was mechanical or weather-related, but they had to make an emergency landing.
Right. Got to land somewhere safe.
Exactly. Now, if you're thinking about geography, a logical detour, if you're headed to Los Angeles, might be somewhere like San Francisco, right?
Yeah, San Francisco makes sense, or maybe even somewhere in Nevada.
Right. But that's not where they landed. They ended up landing in Anchorage, Alaska.
Anchorage. Wow, that's quite a bit north of San Francisco.
Exactly. And this is where things start to get interesting from the author's perspective.
So they're saying this landing spot would be illogical on a globe.
Precisely. They're pointing to these instances where flights make emergency landings in locations that, at first glance on a globe, seem completely out of the way.
And I'm guessing they have an alternative explanation.
They do. They take these flight paths and they overlay them onto a flat Earth map. And on those maps, the landing locations suddenly seem to line up.
So they're using these real-world flight paths to question the very shape of the Earth.
Exactly. And to bolster their claims, they don't just rely on what they see on these flat Earth maps. They use maps, they use flight tracking websites, they even reference interviews with pilots, anything to support this idea that things aren't adding up on a globe.
So they're taking these unexpected detours and using them as evidence for a flat Earth.
Mm-hmm.
It's a pretty bold claim.
It is, and they don't stop there. They go on to analyze several more of these seemingly out-of-place emergency landings, each one adding another layer to their argument. Like another one they talk about is Lufthansa flight LH543 from 2015.
Okay, what happened there?
So this flight was going from Bogota, Colombia to Frankfurt, Germany.
Okay.
But mid-flight, there was a medical emergency. One of the passengers, a woman, went into labor 6 weeks early.
Oh, wow, talk about an unexpected in-flight event.
Right. So they needed to land quickly, and they ended up diverting to Manchester, England.
Manchester. Let's see, looking at a globe. Yeah, that seems pretty far northwest of Frankfurt.
Exactly. And on a globe, you would think they'd try to land somewhere a bit closer to Frankfurt if they're trying to minimize the detour, right?
I think so, yeah.
But again, on a flat Earth map, Manchester is situated almost directly along that path from Bogota to Frankfurt.
So the author sees this as another example of how emergency landings don't quite match up with what we sat back on a globe.
Exactly. It's like they're saying, look at these flight paths. They make so much more sense on a flat Earth, and it just keeps going. But some of the most compelling pieces of this puzzle, at least for the author, involve a whole series of emergency landings made by Of all airlines, Hawaiian Airlines.
Hawaiian Airlines. Okay, what's the story there?
So these flights were either heading to or from the northeastern United States. Boston, New York City, you name it. But get this, instead of making emergency landings somewhere along the East Coast, they often ended up landing in the Northwest.
The Northwest.
Seattle, sometimes even Oakland, places that seem completely out of the way.
Wow. So picture this. You're going from Hawaii to, say, New York City.
Right.
On a globe, wouldn't the most direct route take you eastward across the United States?
Exactly. But these flights ended up landing hundreds, sometimes even thousands of miles off that expected route. And for the author, this is a major, major red flag.
They're seeing a pattern here, aren't they?
They are. They argue that these landings point to a deliberate effort to cover up the true flight paths.
A deliberate effort.
Yeah.
Like a conspiracy.
That's what they suggest. Paths that, in their view, would make much more sense on, you guessed it, a flat Earth model.
So they're implying there's something more going on with these emergency landings than meets the eye.
Exactly. Almost like these flights are accidentally revealing some hidden truth about the shape of the Earth.
Wow, it's definitely a new way of looking at things.
It is. And it gets even more interesting because the author doesn't just focus on these flight paths. They use these real-world examples as a springboard to challenge some pretty fundamental principles of, well, how we understand the world.
Okay, so the plot thickens. We're not just talking about maps and flight paths anymore.
Exactly. We're diving into the realm of physics, folks. Get ready to have your mind blown because next up, we're tackling gravity.
Okay, so challenging gravity. That's a pretty big claim, right?
That's a big one.
I mean, most of us just kind of take it for granted that what goes up must come down. It's like just how things work.
Right. It seems pretty fundamental.
Exactly. So how does the author even begin to approach something like that?
Well, it's interesting. They don't completely deny the existence of gravity.
Okay.
Instead of this force pulling things down, they talk about weight and density.
Weight and density. So heavier objects just naturally gravitate, or I guess I should say downate, towards the ground. Yeah, that's the basic idea. They're saying denser objects have this natural tendency to move downwards. Like imagine dropping a stone in water.
Okay, it sinks.
Right, because it's denser than the water. They believe something similar is happening with objects falling to the earth.
I can kind of see where they're coming from with the analogy, but it still feels like a pretty big jump. Like a stone sinking in water versus, planets orbiting the sun. Those feel a tad different.
Yeah, those are very different scenarios.
Yeah.
And the book does try to address some of these larger scale phenomena, but their core argument really hinges on challenging this traditional notion of gravity as a force.
So if gravity isn't this force pulling things down, how does the author explain, well, everything staying on the ground?
Well, they propose this idea that the Earth is constantly accelerating upwards. And that's what creates the sensation of what we feel as gravity.
Hold on. So it's like being in an elevator that's constantly going up.
Exactly.
You feel heavier, like you're being pressed against the floor.
Right. And they argue that we're essentially experiencing the same thing on Earth, just on a much grander scale.
We're all just constantly being pushed upwards. It's a trippy thought, for sure.
It is.
But wouldn't we notice that constant acceleration? Like, wouldn't we eventually feel it, like being on a never-ending roller coaster ride?
Yeah, and that's a common question people have. The book does address it, although maybe not in as much detail as some readers might want.
Okay.
They suggest this acceleration is so constant, so ingrained in our experience, that we just don't perceive it as anything out of the ordinary.
So we've become accustomed to the constant upward push, so we don't even realize it's happening. Kind of like how you don't feel the Earth spinning.
Precisely. It's all a matter of perspective. But their main point, if you really boil it down, is to use this alternative explanation of gravity to support the larger argument that the world is not what we've been told.
Okay, and this all ties back to those emergency landings.
Yeah.
If you accept this premise that the Earth is flat, gravity works differently, those seemingly illogical flight paths suddenly make a different kind of sense.
Right. They see these landings as evidence that commercial airlines are actually using these flat Earth maps to navigate, but of course concealing that from the public, to maintain the illusion of a globe.
A global conspiracy to hide the true shape of the Earth. That's quite the theory.
Right.
I mean, that would mean a lot of people are in on it. A lot of people keeping the secret.
The book definitely leans into this idea of a grand deception.
And it doesn't just stop at gravity. They challenge other scientific concepts too, right? Like the whole idea that the Earth revolves around the sun.
Oh yeah, they definitely go there. They challenge the heliocentric model, the idea that the sun is the center of the solar system. They're advocating for a geocentric model, putting the Earth back in the center of it all.
Like how ancient astronomers used to view the universe.
Exactly. They argue this geocentric model is just more intuitive, more in line with how we experience the world.
I mean, I get it. We don't feel the Earth spinning. We don't feel it hurtling through space. From our perspective, it really does seem like the sun is moving across the sky.
Right. But then, how do they explain things like the seasons or day and night without the Earth rotating on its axis and revolving around the sun?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Well, they suggest the sun acts more like a moving spotlight over this stationary flat
A
Earth,
spotlight, okay.
and its path just changes throughout the year to create the different seasons.
Okay, so a different mechanism, but leading to the same outcome. What about day and night?
They propose that has to do with the sun's light.
Yeah.
Like imagine the sun as a lamp. As it moves further away from your location on this flat Earth, naturally its light fades and you experience nighttime.
So a very, very different way of visualizing how things work.
Definitely.
What about things like eclipses or the phases of the moon? I mean, those seem pretty connected to how the Earth, the sun, and the moon interact gravitationally, at least as we currently understand it.
They have explanations for those as well, though they might not be what you'd find in, say, an astronomy textbook. Like with eclipses, they suggest those are caused by unseen celestial objects moving between the Earth and the sun or the moon, blocking out the light.
Unseen celestial objects. So they're saying there are other things out there, we just don't know about them.
That's what they're suggesting. And they link this back to the idea of a bigger conspiracy, like there's this information about these other objects and it's being hidden from us.
So there's this whole hidden layer to the universe, at least according to their perspective. This is really fascinating stuff. And this is where it feels like we're going beyond just reinterpreting science, right? We're getting into the realm of, well, what's really out there?
Absolutely. And this next part is where things get even more interesting. They start exploring this idea that there might be land beyond what we typically see on maps.
Okay, now this is what I'm talking about. So not just a flat Earth, but also a hidden world.
Yeah, you could say that. They talk about the possibility of land beyond the Antarctic ice wall, land that's being hidden from us.
Wow. Okay, so just tell me more about that. Like, how do they even begin to support that claim? A hidden world beyond the ice wall, huh? It's like something straight out of a fantasy novel or a movie or something. But it sounds like the author really believes this.
They do. And they bring up all sorts of stuff to back it up. Like they talk about these ancient maps.
Ancient map.
Yeah, maps from like way back when, before people were even really sure the Earth was a globe. And they say these maps, they actually show this hidden land.
Interesting. So they're saying there was this knowledge, but it's been lost or covered up over time.
That's a big part of their argument. And they even mention stories from explorers and sailors who claim to have found land that just, doesn't really fit on our current maps.
Okay, so they're pulling from history, mythology,
Yeah.
personal accounts, basically, anything that hints at this bigger, more mysterious world.
Yeah, it's like they're trying to piece together this puzzle.
Hmm.
But they don't just stop at what might be out there. They also try to answer why someone would want to hide it.
Right, because if this hidden land really exists, there's got to be a reason it's a secret, right?
Exactly. And that's where they get into, well, conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
Hidden resources, like maybe oil or gold or even more advanced civilizations that we haven't discovered yet.
Like a real-life Wakanda.
Something like that.
Mm.
Or maybe even otherworldly beings.
Okay, now we're getting into some X-Files territory.
Right. But their point is there could be all sorts of reasons why someone might want to keep this land under wraps.
So it's about who's in control, who decides what we get to know about our own world.
Exactly. And that idea really resonates with some people. It plays into that human instinct to question authority, to wonder if there's more to the story than we're being told.
Totally. Everyone loves a good mystery, right?
Right.
But it's not just about hidden lands and conspiracies, is it? The author also ties these ideas into their own personal faith.
Yeah, they do. They see their belief in a flat Earth as deeply connected to how they interpret the Bible.
They talk about how some Bible passages, if you take them literally, could be seen as supporting a flat Earth. Right.
Exactly. They bring up the firmament, which is this dome-like structure in the Bible that's described as separating the waters above from the waters below.
Okay.
And they say that could be evidence that Earth is flat, not a sphere.
They also spend a lot of time on the story of Noah's Ark.
Oh, interesting. How does Noah's Ark fit into this?
Well, they question how a global flood would even be possible on a spherical Earth. How would the water cover everything? But on a flat Earth, it makes more sense.
Ah, I see. So the water could just spread out evenly. It's definitely an interesting way to look
It
at it.
is, and it kind of shows how what we already believe can change how we see the world, how we interpret information.
Totally. We all see things through our own lens.
Right, exactly.
And it's not just the Old Testament. They even connect their beliefs to the second coming of Christ. Oh, yeah. They talk about how if the earth is flat, then everyone could witness the second coming at the same time, just like some biblical prophecies describe.
Fascinating. It really makes you think about how our beliefs, whether they're religious or scientific or anything else, they all come together to shape how we understand the world around us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something important for all of us to keep in mind, whatever we believe.
I totally agree. This deep dive has been a wild ride. We've gone from emergency landings to ancient maps to the very nature of gravity and even the possibility of a hidden world.
And don't forget the conspiracies.
Right, of course, the conspiracies. It's definitely given us a lot to think about. Whether you agree with the author's ideas or not, you gotta admit, it's a unique perspective.
Definitely makes you look at things a little differently.
It does. And if you're curious to explore this topic further, be sure to check out the book that sparked this whole conversation, 16 Emergency Landings Proving Flat Earth. It's a really interesting read, even if you don't buy into the whole flat Earth theory. But as always, we encourage you to do your own research, keep asking questions, and form your own opinions.
Exactly. Keep an open mind and never stop exploring.